Florence. Hi, Joji. Hi, Ezra. Hello, Anthony. Hello, Kitty.
Hi.
Hello, hello. All right, let's do our normal chat check-in. How's everybody doing today?
Good.
Good.
I'm doing good, thank you.
Yay! You guys have an okay week? Was the reading a little lighter this week? Sort of?
Oh, yeah.
Good. How did your peer review process go? I'm not looking at that.
Difficult having to grade others.
Was it helpful to see other people's work?
Yes.
Okay. I was like, how can I help you guys study together? Hi, Ronak. Hi, Keely. Hey, Mo. Awesome. Okay, so I wanted to just dive us into discussion pretty quickly today so that we can leave some time at the end of our hour to ask questions about it, and then I will unlock that. It's not all. Does that sound good to you guys?
Wait, sorry, it's kind of hard to hear you.
Uh-oh. Let me mute, folks. I'm going to give you the option to unmute, but I'm going to mute you in case you want to unmute yourself. Is that better, or is my voice still pretty soft?
That helps, thank you.
That helps, okay. Okay, so my hope is to have a fairly quick discussion today in comparison to the last time we got to dive deep, just so that we can leave some questions for the final, or sorry, not the final, but for midterm, if any of you guys have midterm questions. Yes, does that sound good? But we'll see how it goes. As usual, there's plenty to talk about. So just as a recap, this week we did our D module, and I'm just reminding myself, I'm sure you guys are all remembering. So we did the diversity and the question of like, what is America on the big stage? So we looked over musical theater jazz, and we read about Katherine Dunham. We talked a little bit about modern dance just for a moment, in terms of some of the works of the Ailey Dance Company, Katherine Dunham, and changing. Oh, still having a hard time. Okay, hold on. Let me check my my mic. Sometimes it gets confused because I use a different miking system for my other class. Output volume was super low. Is that better now, guys? Ezra, can you hear me better? Megan, yeah? Okay. All right, let me know if we need another tweak. Thanks for letting me know. So we were talking a little bit about how Katherine Dunham really changed, and also Pearl Primus changed the way that academia and high art dance, which we didn't talk about the word high art, but it's sometimes coded because it has to do with what people who have been academically trained in art think is art, you know, with a capital A, versus low art, boo, which is often like the two categories could be, for example, art that you might see in a museum full of old white paintings versus art like graffiti on the street, right? They could both be from equally talented artists, but what has our community considered to be trained and experienced and valuable? That's where the terms high art and low art come from. We don't have to necessarily agree with the values inherent in either of those things, but for the purpose of discussing, we'll use those terms. And then argue about them. Yay! So Katherine Dunham was one of the first people to really go south and back into her roots. So she went to the Caribbean and studied Afro-Caribbean dance moves, and then brought those back to America, both in terms of things that she could teach in the university setting, and she wrote books about these lineages of dance, and also she choreographed, and her work was not just, I mean, you saw that she did a lot of modern dance, but she also did a lot of jazz dance and a lot of movement for films. So she choreographed Stormy Weather, where we saw the excerpt from Nicholas Brothers a couple weeks ago, and then also did a bunch of stage shows, the most famous of which was Le Jazz Hot, which we didn't get to see videos of, and I don't know why. I found some like last year, but they seem to not be up. So if I come across them, I'll throw them back up for you guys. And same is true of Pearl Primus and Alvin Ailey. They were both choreographers who first and foremost hired people of color to perform on concert stages for big white audiences, and also made it really clear that the art of people of color in America is high art. And that was really what changed in their work. And they're in the modern and jazz crossover part because they did a lot of both. And so we also saw some choreography by Tally Beatty, who had worked with Katherine Dunham, and that great piece where he's showing the 80s street culture in Los Angeles. So there you have like high art that's mixed with ballet training, but that's covering real world experiences of people of color, as opposed to what was on the stage then in the 1950s was still pretty much, you know, let's contrast that to, for example, South Pacific. So we have white people in the military for the government going to a foreign place and watching people dance. And that choreography isn't authentic choreography to the people on the islands. It's like made by some white people. And then even when they turned it into a movie, they took out, this is the worst, they took out the original singers' voices and overdubbed them with some more acceptable to mass audiences, other white people voices, right? So there's a huge difference in what we saw in this week's readings and read about between movement and shows that came from people of color versus movement and shows that came from probably at the time well-intentioned white people who were not doing a good enough job, right? So that's sort of the theme of this week. Let me make sure I'm recapping well. Oh, and we read, our big reading for this week was about the Great Migration and civil rights. And mostly I felt like we've done so much heavy reading, right? So we're heading into our final. I wanted to not give you a lot of heavy reading, or final, I keep saying final. We're heading into our midterm and I was trying to not overwhelm you guys with reading. But I wanted to give you a little bit of perspective because I feel like I'm assuming that most of us are people who grew up in California. And so you probably have a okay sense of the history of civil rights. But I felt like what was important in this week was to see how the protests, which we now are more aware were not all nonviolent, right? But a lot of people, especially like my age, so like 10 to 20 years older than you, have this impression that like civil rights movement, it was all peaceful. That's not true, and we know that now, especially right now, which is great. But what I thought was really interesting about that reading was putting that segment of time of the 1960s in perspective as attached to a whole segment of change that came all the way from the 1920s and before. So we spent last week reading about what happened between the Civil War and up through failed Reconstruction. And then this period of time, like 1920s through the middle of the century, there's a lot in the 60s we haven't covered yet that's coming next week, like Fosse and all that. But the idea that this whole transition is like a giant slow moving ship where we're all trying to learn how to live together and to, you guys also, let me double check that I'm seeing this here. Diamond. Do you not have that James article? Or sorry, Farmer article? Diamond, Wilkerson. Oh no. Did you guys not get your Farmer article? That's okay, it's not the end of the world. Okay, so I have another article for you, but I'll share it for next week. Sort of the question of what does integration really mean? What does it mean on the stage? What does it mean in a dance company? What does it mean in choreography? And what does it mean in hiring practices? So do we have any general questions or feedback about that theme? And then I'll shut up and show you a pretty video, and then we'll do a quiz, a poll, and talk about like how did we get there and how do we fix it. I better turn on my do not disturb. Here's another alternate question for this. Did you see anything this week in the choreography that really pissed you off or really made you happy to see a difference? Because remember last week we were looking at how all of the African-American performers were having to just reproduce and then flip all those stereotypes, those racist stereotypes. And now we're finally starting to see people trying to show real life of different communities within America. So did you feel like that was a big step forward, or was it still really personally frustrating to you guys? There's no wrong answers here. This is not a quiz.
I'm personally a really big Hamilton fan, so to see that as one of the examples, I was like really stoked because it kind of blended like, I guess this history in America that maybe wasn't the greatest, but put a more like modern twist on it and incorporated, I don't know, like elements of other communities in America, and I just really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're going to talk about Hamilton today for sure. Yes, it's coming right up. I even have a video for you. Mohammed said, really frustrating. Can you think about like, what was the most frustrating thing you saw this week? And I mean, again, this is no wrong answer. This is totally like your personal feedback about the videos you saw. How did they make you feel from your perspective as a modern person? What was we have a good example in Hamilton. Did anything really make you frustrated? Had everybody seen the West Side Sorority clips before? And do you feel like they do a good job of showing different communities, or are they looking pretty dated now to you? You can go either way.
It always feels kind of, I don't know, weird because it was probably like at the time they're like, oh my god, they're so inclusive and woke or whatever, but now it's like they tried, but maybe not.
Yeah, I think those are both very true statements. At the time, Jerome Robbins putting Latin movement on a Broadway stage was totally groundbreaking, and now we look at it and we go,
yeah.
And we get back to that same question about hybridity in dance versus appropriation. Where do we want to draw that line? Anthony says, I think it's good dynamics, but still somewhat lacking. Yeah, I agree. Does that mean, well, I'm going to ask you this question later because it's also just an opinion question, but do you feel like everything needs to be redone or thrown away or leave it for history? Let that just steep for a little while. So let's go ahead and knowing what your midterm questions are that are coming up, where you're going to be talking about dance, tracing lineage of steps, and talking about culture. Let's look at a little Hamilton example, shall we? I was so excited to show you a high def version, and then the technology wasn't working. So sorry, it's going to look a little clunky, but you can live, right? Let's go full screen. It's pretty short. Let's watch the whole thing. Following us to revolution, there is no more status quo. But the sun comes up and the world still spins. I helped Lafayette draft the Declaration. So try and watch the movements of the dancers here and see what moves look familiar or not familiar. Now the work at home begins. So what did I miss? What did I miss? Virginia, my home sweet home, I want to give
in Paris meeting lots of different ladies. I guess I basically missed the late 80s. I traveled the wide, wide world and came back to this. There's a letter on my desk from the president. Haven't even put my bag down yet. Sally me a lamb, darling, won't you open it? This is the president's assembly in the cabinet, and that I am to be the Secretary of State. Great that I'm already Senate approved. I just got home and now I'm headed up to New York. Looking at the rolling fields, I can't believe that we are free. Ready to face whatever's awaiting me in NYC. Who's waiting for me when I step in the place? My friend James Madison, red in the face. He grabs my arm and I respond, what's going on?
Watch out, Jefferson. He's got COVID. Okay, so did you guys see any particular things? We haven't covered, we have an interloper here. My friend Gary, who's teaching this class in the fall, is secretly here. He might jump in and chat with us. We haven't covered Fosse yet, Gary. That's next week. But did you guys see any elements of, first of all, what mostly style do you think this is? There's no wrong answers here because I don't think there's a straight answer for this. Do you think it's more hip hop? Do you think it's more jazz? Do you think it's more like some of the Golden Age shows that we looked at this week?
Like ballet and jazz.
Yeah, I would say it's not very balletic, except that you saw those elements of ballet that are in jazz. For example, the giant kick that Sally does towards the end here. I wonder if I can easily buffer scroll. Yay! All right, check out these jazz line. Like there's a little parallel passe going on over here on the left. And there's the little white gloves from vaudeville. And there's little tap steps happening here, little shuffle ball changes.
I guess I basically missed the late 80s. I traveled the wide, wide world and came back to this.
Right? So all of this elements in this particular number, and you guys got to see some other numbers from Hamilton in our watch list today or this week. But this one in comparison, do you feel like it's more jazzy than hip hop? I mean, I would say that. But do you see the difference is really my question, or do you want me to keep talking about where I see the difference?
That would be helpful.
Okay, so when we look at the dancing in this one, for example, one of the things that I see is that most of these ladies are lifted up in their heels. I'm gonna try and move for you. It's gonna be perfect. It's gonna be funny, right? So they're on the balls of their feet and they're moving around with their little feet underneath themselves in that uplifted tap way that we saw in some of those Broadway numbers, as opposed to the hip hop moves are usually wide stances and really heavy, just like the buck dancing. So you'd be down as opposed to up and floaty. So we see a lot more of the up and floaty there. There's also like, this is a pretty straight up jazzy piece of music, as opposed to, even though Jefferson's rapping here, it's like you can hear the little like piano riffs that are right? So this number in particular is musically also more jazzy. And then someone totally rightly said, giant kicks. Let me see if I can find that giant kick. I think it's right here. Right, that little hip shimmy, big kick that she does there on the left, yes? Also, I have so many things to say about that little moment. But I'm going to save some of them for next week when we talk about sexuality and gender issues, or right? Because did anybody catch the name of who that ensemble cast member is right there?
I was literally just going to tell you that, but thank you.
Yay! Yes. We only play that little moment there. Look, there's a slide down into the splits that we saw in Nicholas Brothers and everywhere else. That arch over the top is very jazz. Uh-oh, he's got COVID. It's terrible, I can't stop making that joke. I'm sorry. Oh, I went too far forward. I apologize. There she is. So this character here, this woman right here, he says, I got a letter from the president. He says, Sally, go ahead and read that to, or open that for me, right? So this character right here is named Sally, even though the rest of the time she's just an ensemble cast member. In this one moment, Lin-Manuel Miranda decided to name that ensemble member in the lyrics. Does anybody know who Sally is? We're going to talk about her next week. She was the slave that Jefferson kept in his basement. Some now call her his mistress because she gave birth to 7 or 8 children for him while he had his wife and other family upstairs. So next week, we're going to talk about how weird that little moment was where she comes over and is like, here's your letter, honey. And yeah, so let's save that. But it's worth noticing also because we're talking about dance style. And she's doing a little jazzy butt wiggle movement there, yeah? And then the big kick, which would be different in hip hop because you'd probably be more forward and back with your pelvis in hip hop as opposed to side to side. Small details, there's definitely overlap, obviously. That's why we're talking about both, but we'll come back to that moment next time. Do you guys have any other things that you noticed about this piece? And, or if you've seen all of Hamilton, which a lot of us did this week, did you notice how the first act has so much more hip hop and the second act has a lot more different, still all very Broadway style music in it? Or any other comments you want to throw out there? Open forum for Hamilton comment. And then I'm going to stop share and set up your poll.
Can I add something that I think would...
Oh, please. This is Gary, everybody. He's going to take over for me for this class while I am on maternity leave in the fall. And he also is our guest director for Chicago this last spring and my very good friend. He's lovely.
Yay. So I wanted to go back to your first initial question with South Pacific. So we talk about, and I think this is so interesting with Hamilton, we talk about how they basically took a culture, right? The Asian culture, Polynesian culture, that whole idea, and made it more palatable at that time for the Caucasians. Well, I dare say, what did we do with Hamilton? That's literally what we did. And that's one of the reasons why so many people find it so interesting. We took Hamilton, a show that is classically about a different culture than 90% of us, and made it palatable for us. So I guess I'd ask the bigger question, is turning their theology, if you will, back on them? What do we think of that? That we literally took it, right, and made it more palatable. We talk about, right, that they did it to us. Now we're doing it to them. But we find it interesting. So I think that's that whole thing about history. At this point in history, where we're saying, oh, this is palatable, this is this. Well, people look at us in 30 years and go, well, why would they bastardize it like that? This was these people. So I guess I'd ask the room, what do you think about it, since we've been talking about how other things seem dated? Will this seem dated in 30 years because what we've done is use their formula?
Whoa.
Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
No, my mind is being blown right now. I hadn't, whoa.
And let me go on a little bit more why everybody's thinking of that, because I love that. So West Side Story was also what we need to remember is it's got to come from a point of view. 3 Jewish men wrote West Side Story from the point of view of the Jets. It was never written from the point of view of the Sharks. It wasn't supposed to be an homage to the Sharks, right? In every movie, we see a good guy and a bad guy. So we think West Side Story, I believe, is so dated because it was written from their perspective. But as we have people of color, we sit there and we go, well, this is not how we act. But to other people looking in, peeking in the window, couldn't that be how we seem? Isn't perception part of what we take in? So that's why we ask all the time, do these classics go away? Because they're still written from the perspective of the person who wrote it.
I'm leaving a spacious gap for you guys to pipe up. You could totally disagree. This is a discussion. You're allowed to disagree or agree or neither or something in between.
I guess that helps me understand the perspective that I guess like mainstream society had looking back at these older films or dances. It's like it was modern to them and it was probably super like innovative and like, whoa, breaking boundaries, just like Hamilton is today. But it's like, it's still the same.
Sad, but true.
Can you imagine in 30 years when you guys have grandkids and all of a sudden your grandkids or great grandkids want to cancel Hamilton because it's a dated piece?
I mean, it's funny you mentioned that now because I think, you know, as I'm sure all of us know, Disney Plus just released Hamilton on their Disney platform and everybody was completely outraged due to the fact that people are now digging in and seeing like, well, wait a minute, due to things that are going on now, this is hitting home a little closer and closer. And so to your point, back then it was seen completely different as to now because the trying times that we're living in where people are digging in and they're like, this is unacceptable. Yes, he was a slave, but to Miss Sale's point as well, like he kept this one, had children with her. Like there's a lot of backstory that's coming out. So in my opinion, it's history. It's the way it's mapped out is not ideal. I'd hate for the history to go away, but I don't see it lasting with the times that we're in. I don't see it being something that, I mean, I don't know. I'm still trying to see if they pull Hamilton from Disney, honestly. And then same with the West Side Story, which is a huge musical, which is one of my favorites, but same thing. Like if I was, you know, coming from that background of the Latin American background that they're in, I could literally sit there and say like, my family's never done X, Y, and Z, or I can't compare to any of this. So, you know, this is definitely not how things are ran in this culture. So I definitely agree with you.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to release this poll because you just transitioned us right on into it. Thank you very much. And then we're going to talk a little bit about something that you guys probably don't know about, and which, Gary, you can correct me at any point in this because I've learned all of this from you. So we're going to talk about hiring practices on Broadway. So if you guys, yes, Anthony, I agree. Culture and society has always had influence over the creative arts to a certain degree. Absolutely true. So if you were a performer, a singer, dancer, and you wanted to get a job on Broadway, remember a couple weeks ago we talked about the sort of myth of success that vaudeville reinforced in our society, that if you are just talented enough, you could go to the big city and audition and be discovered and be a superstar. And then once you're a superstar, you're gonna make all the money in the world and everything is gonna be okay for you, and you will have a voice for your community or your artistic background, that you now have a platform, right? That's the dream of performers. And it's back in the beginning of the 1900s, it would be about becoming a star on vaudeville. Now it's about becoming an influencer or maybe having a reality show or being a movie star, right? But the same trope of like capitalist success because you go to the big city and get discovered still holds true. So is that very possible? So here's the background that I'm sure Gary can correct me on. If you are a performer and you show up to audition for a show, let's say you want to be just that woman in the white outfit who has a name for one scene. You're an ensemble dancer. Does she even have a solo singing line? I'm not sure. I don't think she does. You're going to show up to that audition with 500 to 1,000 other people trying out. Yeah. And then you're going to be watched by some casting directors, not necessarily the director of the show. And they're going to cut you. It's literally called a cattle call. So they'll have you learn the choreography as fast as possible. They maybe will show it 3 times. If there's a lot of people, they got to go. So you've seen the dance 3 times, and then you have to be able to do it immediately. So first of all, you have to have the training to be able to do those skills. Secondly, you have to have the experience to be able to learn movement quickly, which is a skill that you work on when you're a dancer. Thirdly, you have to have the free time off of work to go to this audition. And then you have to have a resume. So your resume in Broadway is usually your headshot on, so like a nice photo on one side, and you flip it over and you get like 1 page worth of experience. And there's 1,000 of those sheets of paper that this committee is looking at. So they're watching everybody dance, probably 30, 50 of you at a time. And then they'll say, you have a little number on you because you're at the cattle call and you have a stamp. And they'll say, number 103 and number 102, everybody else, thank you. And then all 48 of those people go home. And they cut that down from 1,000 to, I don't know, maybe the next round is 40 people. And then they cut down to maybe 12, and then maybe 5, maybe 3. So in that spectrum of 1,000 people, you have to have talent, right? You have to have some sort of performance quality. You have to be able to learn the choreography immediately fast and the training to do that stuff. So what I want us to talk about next, let's take a look at the poll results. We've got half of you so far. So if you haven't done it yet, go ahead and poke in there. What do you think those elements are in terms of how are they affected by racial bias? How are those elements of what a casting director is looking at affected by opportunity and experience and talent? And what do we think about those choices? Because if any of you guys have been through auditions before, you know that it's extremely emotional to be judged, and that every time you audition, you get better at receiving feedback and changing the way you perform. And that everybody in the room really probably wants the best performer possible so that the show can be as successful as possible, so everyone can have a good show, make good art, and have an income. So we're gonna look at sort of what your impressions are about that hiring process and how that gets entangled with issues of race and opportunity. All right, we're at 64%. I'm gonna call it. Yes? Anybody still waving their arms at me? Okay. So I'm gonna end poll. I'm gonna share results. So the first one here, I just wanted to give us sort of a perspective on how many shows are out there that you can audition for as a person of color and even have a chance to be in. Yeah. So most of us off the top of our head, like by a landslide, 67% of you guys said, I can only think of 1 to 3 shows where a quarter of the cast is of color. And that's only a quarter, right? That's not even like Hamilton where everybody except for 1 is a person of color. So how many roles does that place out there in the world for people to audition for in the first place? Not very many, right? And then the second question, I was just curious. Before you knew about the choreographer, but only having heard or seen the movement from the musical, did you have assumptions about the choreographer of Hamilton's race or background? And it looks like, this is kind of interesting actually, 44%, so 4 out of 9 of us assumed they were a person of color, 22% assumed white, 22% assumed gay, Nobody thought they were straight. There's a dance bias for us, huh? Nobody thought they were male. That's interesting. And so I wanted to throw that out there to sort of see what we assumed, right? Because I think if I had asked you, what do you think Jerome Robbins looks like, right? Who has ballet skills, we would have gotten a certain answer out of that, right? And so I was sort of curious if you guys had assumptions in the first place. Do you guys know who the choreographer of Hamilton is? Gary's face cracks me up. So we'll watch a little video with him and talk about him next week. But he is a white gay man doing hip hop choreography in a musical that is supposed to be all about giving jobs to people of color on Broadway. It's a little problematic, and yeah, there's many of us have feelings about that. Did you feel like there was real authentic hip hop movement in the hip hop scenes that we saw? Not the one we saw today was mostly jazzy, but like you guys saw some other excerpts this week from Hamilton that were more hip hop based. I know what Gary thinks because we talk about it all the time. But I'm curious, what did you guys think? Yes, his name is Andy. That's right, Ezra. Megan still can't scroll down to finish our poor polls. Poor Megan. I'm sorry. I should have made a poll question about this. Do you think it's hip hop? It's a valid question.
More of it in the music rather than the actual dance itself.
Mm-hmm. I also thought that for those of you who watch the Disney Plus version, since it's the easiest to see, I thought that the choreography was executed with much less effort and strength than some of the Tony performances. They might be getting tired. Which is why I gave you guys some like of the Tony performances and older versions of excerpts to look at also.
If it helps, it was shot on a Monday, which was their day off. So they had just come off a Sunday. They were supposed to have the Monday off. So it was very tight.
Whew. And normally that means they would have already done 8 shows that week, and then they have to come in for the 8th row and do a 9th one.
And then start the week all over again. So
yes.
It was a 16-week run before they had a day off.
Ugh. Ugh. I'm glad you guys have unions. Okay, so is this the last? Yeah. The last question in this poll, I have another one for later, but the last question in this poll is, do you personally have any interest in watching musicals that we now see as racially inappropriate? And 67% of you said yes for history's sake, and then we threw out some other ideas like, I'd like to see a revamp, but I don't really care about the original anymore. 22% of you are like, I'm too tired to watch this racist junk anymore. Go for it. I don't care for all the old choreography, and I don't care for the old music. All right, just 11%, which is totally fine. So I just want to kind of throw that idea out and see what my question was mostly to sort of take the temperature of the room about cancel culture and see what you guys think about it. Because I think, as Gary said, when your grandkids are around, you might ask these same questions about Hamilton, right? Because I don't know, it probably is going to come up.
Can I add something that may also push this in a direction?
Mm-hmm,
so the Sally that you just saw, the Sally that we talked about by the kicking, her name is Ariana DeBose. She was just in the Donna Summer musical on Broadway, and now, so I can't wait for this, she is Anita in the revival movie of West Side Story. So I just heard a lot of people said they're not going to watch, right? They're not going to watch any of the old ones, but she's in the movie. So what must the movie be saying now for someone who's in the original cast of Hamilton to want to sign up to play Anita in the new movie?
That's exciting. I'm excited to see what they do. So 12:40. I'm going to just launch this next poll now that we've talked about how the hiring process goes, because I know we might not all be familiar with it. Megan, I'm going to read the questions out to you since I know you can't scroll all the way down. Based on our discussion so far, do you think that it is possible to blind cast a performance? So the question there is really like, knowing that you have to have experience and training in order to get through 1,000 people worth of competition, and how we know that those experience and training opportunities are different for different communities, right? So we've talked about how many of the dancers learn their dances on the street versus many of the white dancers were having the time where their parents could pay for them to learn in a studio. And in the last segment where we talked about the transition into vaudeville, we talked about how some of those tap dancers and ballet trained dancers from the white communities were traveling to Harlem to then study with the best tap dancers who had learned on the streets. So then those white dancers inherently already have a leg up because A, they weren't struggling to eat when they could go to dance classes, and B, they had both ballet training and the training from the best tappers in the world in Harlem. So is it even possible to hire someone out of 1,000 people at a time and not have a bias of race over your choice making? That's question number one. Number two, which of the following attributes do you think it's most important for a casting director to focus on? Perfect execution of the steps, the it that makes someone's performance like really stand out and shine, like star quality, reliability, because you need them to be able to do 8 shows a week and maybe 9, or the look or the character that they're trying to cast. So do you want to cast someone who shows up looking like or able to impersonate the character as you expect it from this script of the play, for example? And then what do you think a production hiring director should look for in a choreographer? So the person who's creating the dance for a new show. Should it be the best choreography they've ever seen? Should it be that the choreographer can teach as fast as possible? Should it be that the choreographer has a resume so you know that they have experience having done a bunch of stuff? Should it be that the choreographer is able to present themselves really well on TV because they are eventually going to be doing some of the PR to do outreach for the show? Or someone with a work style that you know from experience goes well with the other members of your team. So if you're hiring, you already have your director and you already have your costumer. Do you want to hire someone who you know they get along with? And then the last question is, which of the answers from question 2 or 3 are biased by the opportunities that an applicant has had? So which of those answers, therefore, might be affected by racial bias? All those things that we talked about, like what are the most important things in hiring someone, how many of those things have already been affected by racial bias before you get there? If you're trying to hire a dancer, they didn't have mommy who could pay for ballet for 10 years because they weren't from a rich white family, then that one's off the list already, right? If you have that difference in training and you come to a cattle call with 1,000 people and only 25% of the roles are for people of color because of the way the character is supposed to look, how is that performer going to get the experience as quickly as a performer who does have the training, who does have 17,000 more shows because there are just more roles for Caucasian people? So that one's already biased. Whether or not the casting director intends to be racially biased or not, this is what counts as implicit bias in hiring practices. I'm gonna let you guys rip on this. 71% voted, we're doing good. Yay, Ezra's back. All right. Everybody good? Yep. Cool. Okay, I'm gonna share these results. I suspect we're not gonna be surprised about any of these answers. All right. Question number 1, based on our discussion, do you think that it's possible to blind cast a performance? And 60% of you said only if you block your view of the person auditioning. Which I put that question in there because there are symphonies that do this. I don't know if you know this. They like literally have the people casting out in the audience and they put up a giant screen so they cannot see the auditionees at all. And the person just comes in and plays their instrument behind a curtain. But if we're talking about opportunity to have the experience to perform at a bunch of orchestras before you get to that audition, or what kind of training your family could afford, doesn't that affect already that person, that auditionee's opportunity to have had the experience? So I think, yes, that is one way to make it less biased, but I don't think that even that can erase all the bias that's written into our society. What do you think is most important for a casting director to focus on? Ooh, interesting. So we have 40% said it quality, so like your star quality, and 50% said reliability. So if you didn't know this person and you just could see their resume, if you are talking about a Caucasian performer who's had the privilege to be able to be in shows since they were a little kid because they didn't have to work, versus a person of color performer who already we went from like all the shows in the world to just a few shows in the world, and then just a quarter of those shows have characters that that person of color could traditionally be cast in. How much experience is the person of color going to have in comparison to all those Caucasian performers? Just like whether, irrelevant of how much talent they are, right? We're kind of stuck already there. And then the other question about reliability is how it relates to networking, right? So the other way that you know that someone is reliable is because you know them personally. So if you are just already not in the know with someone, that you haven't worked with them before because it's very hard for them to get a chance to work, or because you hang out in different circles, right? That makes it really hard to build a feeling of trust. So even this idea that reliability is what we should be looking for is already tilted by bias in a way that is hard to overcome. And then question 3, what should we look for in a choreographer? 30%, this is the runner-up answer, is the best choreographer you've ever seen. And 50%, I mean, that might be how we ended up with characters like Fosse, who we get to next week. 50% said someone with a work style that you know blends well with the rest of the crew's work style. Sounds like a good answer, right? But then again, we run into that question of how much opportunity has that person had to work with other people that you know? How many things do they have on their resume because of those other biases? And also, like, you know, if you've been working with the same people you grew up from your neighborhood and your dance classes with for the past 10 years, and a person of color comes in who didn't get to go to all those dance classes with you or work in all those shows with you, you're inherently going to trust them less just because you don't know them yet. So even there, it's a rough part. Yes, hiring is hard.
I mean, I know, I do it for a living. So I work in sales. I'm a sales recruiter. I hire for sales. I think I mentioned this to this class, but D&I is huge for me and my organization. Getting diversity inclusion in there is big. Hiring is not easy.
Yeah. I had a feeling you would be very excited about this or mad.
Wait a minute, let me chime in here. Because yeah, there's a lot of ins and outs. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, a background and a resume, and I mean, if you're looking for experience, it's gonna show on the resume. I mean, I went afar and beyond where a lot of resumes have pictures today where you can actually see the person. I would cut off the pictures to not judge based on what they look like and base it on their experience. So really depends, honestly. So it's an agree to disagree kind of concept for sure.
Mm-hmm. There's also the good question about like in terms of experience, like baby steps versus having to jump. So when we've covered all these ways in which there are just less opportunities for people of color to even get entry-level jobs. So if you have 10 years where you're having trouble getting those entry-level jobs because of implicit bias and just regular old normal competition, and by the time that you get older, you're just going to have less on your resume than someone who can get a bunch of little small things because it's just not as, there's just more opportunity. So I don't know, Steele, do you have an answer to that one yet? Because you're our future.
Don't put that pressure on me.
You got time to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's definitely been tough. I agree. I definitely agree with you. I am one that stands out. I mean, in terms of hiring, we hire for people who have degrees. I myself don't have a degree, yet I've made it as far as I have without one. So I'm backtracking here. So I'm one of those people where if you were to look at my resume, to Gary's point, and the head nod and everything, I wouldn't be someone I would not hire myself.
Ooh.
Because exactly, I don't have a degree. So a lot of things factor in terms of hiring, and I hope, and something that, like, for your what you had said, I'm the future. I mean, I'm hoping things start to change. I mean, if we want diversity, if we want that inclusion, you got to look away from resumes and experience, and kind of get them on the phone and get them in person to see what they really can do and if they can do the job. And that's kind of what I'm advocating for moving forward with my hiring process, at least.
Yeah.
Can I just add something? I think it's so perfect, your follow-up, because I was literally going to say to you, I feel like right now we're the chicken and the egg, right? We don't know what it is.
Which one came first?
Right? So for years and years and years, it was all about, and I'll make this real fast, Amber, it was all about get the education. So people of color, our parents were sending us to school, right? But then all of a sudden there was this shift, right? Because our Caucasian counterparts were not going to school. So now it was about, okay, well, let's look past all this Ivy League education. But we finally got in the door. So now the education doesn't matter. It's about the resume. So now that I have this, I have to get the jobs. Well, all of a sudden, right, I have to, and we were talking about this, it's the stepping stones. For every one stepping stone, well, those stepping stones aren't available to me, so I have to jump over 5. So there's no way, unless you give a person of color the opportunity to ride to that occasion, that they're literally going to have the same skills on the resume as their counterpart. There is no logical way you can do that.
Right. No, I completely agree. I'll make this quick too, Amber. No, I completely agree with you. I mean, at the end of the day, in terms of hiring, I can tell my reps till they're blue in the face or until I'm blue in the face, hey, you need experience in sales. Who's going to give me that experience in sales? Sally, you're telling me I need X, Y, and Z, yet you and your company aren't letting me show you what the knowledge I have and the skills I have to implement into your organization. So I completely get it.
So are they telling you in a roundabout way, we want you where we have you. We don't want you to get to the next level. And then how long do you stay there before you tap out? That right. Is, I think.
Yep, no, I definitely agree. It's definitely something that's been kind of up in the air, and thank God where I work, it's not an issue where I can pivot, and if I find a candidate who might not have the experience, but I can advocate for because I know that they'll be strong and successful, I'm right there rooting you on.
I see Ezrahita's comment that she's seeing, sorry, I'm trying not to misspell your name while I'm typing really fast, that she's seeing bias in her workplace too, and I was wondering if you had any ideas on how it happened, if it was a similar pattern there, do you think? And then it is 12:55. I'm trying to be good about time, which I'm terrible at. But I wanted to give you guys a chance to ask any questions about the midterm, in case anybody has midterm questions.
I had one question in terms of the first question. Are we supposed to add video links to the dance styles that we're talking about?
Ooh, to all of them? No, it's not necessary. If it were a paper, yeah. I would say yes. But since it's not a paper, it's just a like exam, do it on the spot. No, you don't need video links, but do try and describe them enough that I can imagine them without seeing them. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Jody, did you have a question? I saw you pop out of mute for a second there.
I was going to say, whoo, no video links. That's cool.
Yes. Phew, for once. So how many points is the midterm? I don't have a point score on there yet, but I can tell you the more important part, which is that the whole class is broken up by percentages. So all of the weekly stuff that we're doing is half of the work, and then 25% is the midterm and 25% is the final. And then the little extra credit points that you guys are getting for showing up to the discussion and participating in the discussion, those points go, half of them, so the first 3 are going into the midterm and the other half of them are going towards your final. So the more you participate and speak up in discussion, that'll help your midterm and then your final grades. And if you look at the assignments view, assignments by type on Canvas, then you can see where all of the points fall. How many questions in the midterm? You have those 3 written questions that you have already seen. And then you have, I think there's 5 randomized other multiple choice questions.
Quick question in terms of the, what is it, the note sheet that you had mentioned? You said 1 to 2 pages for the note sheet. Okay, is this something, are we just taking those 3 questions now, fine tuning them and putting them in a sheet of 2 pages?
Sure, I mean, you're gonna write the answers in real time. So your note sheet is basically like anything that you feel like you're going to want to refer to that you might not remember off the top of your head, right? So if you were like, what years was Bojangles performing in, or what was the name of that hip movement dance that came from West Africa that we looked at, like those are the sort of things that I would have on your note sheet, just so that you don't have to, you don't want to waste your time when you should be writing an argument, having to look up those details. So the hope is that you have an idea of how you're going to answer those 3 questions already, and you don't need to have written them out beautifully, but that you have all the data that you want to refer to on your note sheet, so you can just kind of
copy and paste.
Like explain your argument to me.
Okay.
Right. So the writing part of it is what you're doing during the timing spot, but like you shouldn't have to look up any information while you're doing the test.
Okay. And then the writing section is on these 3 questions. These are the 3 questions that we
Those are the 3 questions.
Okay.
There's 5 multiple choice questions. They're randomized and shuffled for everybody, so they'll be different. But the 3 written questions are exactly, I think maybe I changed like 3 words in them, but they're almost exactly what you saw before. So no surprises there.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and sort of the more you describe to me the movements that you are using to make your argument, right? If you're like, remember we looked at that Hamilton video really quick today, and we talked about like, oh, we can see passe in parallel, that's a jazz dance move, or we can see a high kick, that's a ballet move, or if we'd watched a dance that had twerking in it and we could relate it back to the Mutwashi dance community dance video that we saw. So a point like that you want to make that you might not come right off your tongue in a stressful situation are the sort of stuff you want to put in your note sheet. Anthony's asking, are multiple choice questions based on this week's readings? And they're, well, they're not the same for everybody, right, as I said, because it has a bank that it picks from. So they're sort of from everything over the past 3-4 weeks. Any other excellent questions? If not, it is 1 and I can free you to the universe. And then I will double check and make sure that your midterm is open. And I'm going to give you, is it okay to just give you a week? And then it has a timer on it. So you have I believe an hour and a half to do it. So make sure your internet is secure before you start, because it's a one hit wonder, right? You want to make sure that you're ready to go, that you have your note sheet, and that you're, I don't know, a glass of water. You don't need a number 2 pencil. Y'all, everybody's like, number 2 pencil, what's that? Y'all, any other questions? We good? Okay. Go forth and be wondrous. It was great talking to you guys. Thanks for stopping in, Gary.
Thank you.
Yay.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, thank you. Dun, 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 dun. I'm here if anybody has any lingering questions. Bye, Mo. Thank